So the subject of tonight's talk, Ian Milsted of York Archaeology, archaeology and prescription. And I rather think that the slide of Willow House is appropriate because I rather like the way community digs have started taking off, because that literally is in a community. You've got, if you don't know the site very well, just within Walmgate Bar, surrounded by 1960s council housing. So people can actually look out of their windows and watch the dig going on. So rather than being behind 10-foot high wooden screens, it's possible to see. So I think that suffices as an introduction, Ian. Ian says he'll take a few questions at the end, so I'll just hand you over to Ian Milsted. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And just as an aside, I think this is my first proper in-person lecture since before the pandemic. So good luck. I might be a bit rusty. Done quite a lot on Zoom, but then you're just talking to your own laptop and it's a little bit soulless. So I'm very happy to be here and it's lovely to see you. Archaeology on prescription is an interesting project name. It was kind of thought up on the hoof a little bit very early on in this project, and like a lot of titles of that nature, it stuck. But unlike some of them, it's actually quite accurate. So I'll explain more in a minute. But we are at Willow House, and I'll show you some maps and photographs in a bit to show you exactly whereabouts that is. Actually, before the pandemic, we had a former colleague of mine, Jen Jackson, who some of you may have met when she was still working with York Archaeology. She started to try and develop the idea that we could use field archaeology to deliver social prescribing. Social prescribing is a movement that is sometimes described as green prescribing, and it's an idea for people who are suffering from poor mental health or who have other well-being needs, particularly loneliness or isolation, can actually undertake an activity in a social setting, usually outside, the sole purpose of which is for them just to meet new people, gain a bit of confidence in a social space, and perhaps learn a few more skills. And we had a strong feeling that archaeology, and specifically field archaeology, would be quite a good method for doing this. So, as it says there, we have a kind of fundamental belief that by its nature, archaeology has a huge potential for delivering these sort of well-being benefit. It's about human experience. It's not about anything else. Archaeology is the study of people by people. It's usually done socially in groups. It's usually done outside. And, you know, if you've ever met an archaeologist, and there are several in the room here, the reason why we tend to stay doing it for so long is usually because we quite like people. But not always. But, you know, it's fun, it's sociable, it's engaging, and we want to see whether it would work. So we had a good long chat with the City of York, who were council, who were really helpful and very helpful. In fact, they continue to be very supportive of the project, and we're very grateful for that. And we started to look at how we could achieve those 3 points on the bottom: improve health and well-being, help people to foster meaningful social connections, and help build and their confidence. So there is a huge literature in the city behind this sort of initiative, which we were obviously very cognizant of, and we made sure we were aligned with, particularly the cultural strategy and the joint strategic needs assessment. Just trying to make sure that we were hitting those expectations, those targets, those needs that have been identified elsewhere in the city, and I think we have achieved that. And then, of course, we had a dreadful pandemic, and as we came out of that, we realized that there was a need for a project like this, perhaps more than there ever had been before. And my colleague, Katrina, who was there, who has now moved on from the trust, she's now working for the Museum of London, but she pretty well single-handedly got this project back underway, working closely with Sarah Maltby, who has been at the trust for a long time. I'm sure most of you have met her. So Sarah got the funding in place, Katrina did the legwork, built the connections, and started this project up again. And the results are what you can see. So we had some quite lofty project aims, as these things all have to have. We wanted to have a positive and meaningful impact on the well-being of all participants. We wanted to look at exploring new ways to get people in who have had a chance to do so before. We wanted to contribute to well-being across the City of York and everyone in it. everyone in it's quite a tall order because that's about 250,000 people. But you know, we might as well set the bar high and see how close you get. We wanted to increase the diversity of participants in archaeology as well, trying to find new audiences, people who might feel otherwise excluded for whatever reason. Work in partnership with many organisations across York. York is very rich in trusts, in charities, in initiatives, in groups like this one. Lots of very active and engaged people helping particular sectors of society. And it's by trying to bridge some of those organisations with new projects is how you try and bring a different mix of people together. That's what we wanted to try and do. And most importantly, we wanted to make sure it was as accessible as it could possibly be. And that's not just in terms of the physical space, although that's really important, but it's also the environment, the nature of the task, the complexity of it, just to try and get around this idea that, well, it's not for me, which a large number of people have actually told me they were told years ago, particularly women, actually, I find, who were young people in their 50s or the 60s and say, I've wanted to do this all my life. And I was always told, no, you can't do that. There we go. It's nonsense. And hopefully we can be a small part of improving. And to inspire a sense of connection with place. You know, a lot of people in archaeology perhaps don't realise, because they're not necessarily from the place where they're working, just how important some of this material actually is to the people who live and work there. I've only been in York for 20 years myself, so you know I'm hardly a local. You know, it's important to bring as many people in as possible. So that was the idea. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we went back to council and they very kindly said that we could use the garden of the former Willow House care home just inside Walmgate Bar, which was very helpful. So they've let us use that space for nothing. They let us use the building as well, which although it has no power or running water, it nevertheless is a big secure space. And we bring cabins and toilets and things as well. And it's proven to be perfect for this kind of work. We are very fortunate as well to get a lot of funding to help get this underway. Names up there are some local community funding, particularly Indonesia, the York's Cultural and Wellbeing Fund, and then latterly the IGEM Partnership and many others who I haven't put on that slide. And we also benefited hugely from national funders. And the first big one that really gave us a big boost was the Community Renewal Fund, which was part of the post-COVID recovery effort. This is a central government fund. It's administered through the City of York Council. York weren't allocated in the first round, but after a kind of appeal, York was allocated some slice of that funding. There were only 2 awards made in the city, and we were very fortunate to be one of them. I'm very grateful for that. So that kept us going for the best part of the year. And then we secured Heritage Lottery funding in September. Again, extremely grateful for that too. And that gives us a solid block of funding to take the programme through to 2025, which is the next milestone for us in terms of its development. And the NHS, the local NHS, have been extraordinarily great, helpful as well. So Sheila Fletcher, NHS Vale of York, CCG as they were, last winter, and then this winter just gone, the ICS as it's now known, we've had some support from the NHS as well. So it's been very well supported and we're extremely thankful for that. And it's allowed us to do this, otherwise it wouldn't have been possible. We've also worked with local organisations such as CERT, who are part of Converge, which is a charity based at the University of York St John. They were also extremely helpful, providing advice and guidance and support when we were setting this project up. Quite a lot of our first cohort of participants came through Converge, and their team, their evaluation team, is actually made of Converge members, and they actually came and did some sort of external evaluation of the effect we were having. So from the beginning, we were trying to gauge, were we having a positive impact, and if so, how and why? And I'll come back to that towards the end. So what is Archaeology on Prescription? Well, it's a year-round programme, and we operate on-site for 3 major blocks of time in the summer. We call those blocks imaginatively spring, summer and autumn, you know, because we're very creative. I seem to be drawing green lines on the screen. Anyway, and then we also operate over the winter. We don't operate on site over the winter. As I said, the buildings there have no electricity or running water. so that's not particularly pleasant in January. We actually used some rooms here at the Friends Meeting House, which were perfect. And we used some of the Trust's own facilities, particularly at DIG on St Saviour Gate, to deliver a series of workshops, which I'll give you a bit more detail about later on. So the idea is that we keep this going year on year. That's the ambition. So a participant will come to us. The idea was that they would have 2 on-site blocks of time with us and an opportunity to do the winter programme. And then those who wanted to could take advantage of a bursary to come onto our training excavation and actually get some more intensive archaeological skills training, if that's the direction they wanted to go in. And if not, then fine. We designed this project in such a way to try and provide a mechanism for people to leave it again in a positive and constructive way, and to help signpost to other activities. And I'm really pleased there's an excavation now being run at Benningborough Hall, and the name of the organisation doing it has completely left my mind, so I apologise now. Hopefully someone in the audience will remember who they are. Some of our volunteers, some of our participants have become volunteers in that project, and that's wonderful. That's new people being able to have the confidence to go into community archaeology, nothing to do with the trust, completely on their own steam, and take part in a community project. So, you know, we're very, very proud of them and very pleased to have played a small part. So we run, I've said Monday to Friday up there, it's actually Monday to Thursday, 2 sessions a day. Each session is 2 hours long, and we only have up to 6 people in each session, but we do have 3 members of staff. That's a very high ratio, but the reason for that is to make sure that we've got a safe and calm and attentive environment that doesn't feel rushed, it doesn't feel crowded, and it also reflects the fact that some of our participants have additional needs. Some of them have additional learning difficulties, some of them require calmer, quieter spaces, and one of the strengths of the project is that it works in quite a small, manageable scale, and that was deliberate. We designed that in from the start. So I'll talk about who the participants are. So there are 2 main routes onto our project, and the most important, well, not the most important, the primary one is the social prescribing link. So working with York CBS, who are the coordinators for social prescribing in the city of York, they work in the NHS primary care system, taking people either self-referring or being referred from their GP surgery, who are then referred to them to find social activities in the city for them to take part in, and we're one of the projects that they can refer to. Now, last year in 2022, we had 69 individuals come through, 10 of whom came directly through the NHS via the social prescribing link. Now, we have taken a lot of advice. We've worked closely with colleagues elsewhere in the sector across the UK. We're one of the few, if not the only organisation doing social prescribing in field archaeology, and we're also one of the very few to have got any traction with the NHS. Social prescribing works very differently from region to region, from city to city, as indeed does the NHS. And getting a bit of traction in that can actually be really, really difficult. And it's testament to the work that Sarah Maltby and Katrina Garger did in that post-COVID period to really make those links. And then the site team themselves, who did a fantastic job delivering last year's full program and doing it really successfully. So, you know, we've had a really good year. The remainder of the participants came from a variety of, we call them non-statutory to distinguish them from the NHS route, other organisations in the city. So I've mentioned Converge, as I said, University of York St John. They provide access to higher education resources for people, isolated people in the community, amongst others. Changing Lives, also known as Oak Trees, they work with people recovering from substance abuse. We also work SASH, which is Safe and Secure Housing, working with young people who are at risk of homelessness. Tank Heart, who support young people with learning difficulties, amongst others. Ditto Blueberry Academy, which is a slightly more formal education setting, again, working with young people with learning difficulties of a variety of spectra. And The Hut, who are older people, adults with learning difficulties who also have well-being and health needs. So it's quite a wide range. It's a wide range of people from, 20, 25 through to, 50 plus, and people from quite a wide range of backgrounds and experiences. And the majority of the sessions are mixed. A few of them require their own session, and we can be flexible and provide that. But the majority are in with people from different places and different organizations, because the idea is that it's a social experience. That's the whole point. We've had a few people self-refer. We now put them back to CBS because that's a safer route for them to come through. They're coming through an external organization. And that's partly how we manage the safeguarding to look after these people. Some of them are quite vulnerable. And there are a few who finish their time with one of these organizations, and we then invite them back, if they want to have another block of time with us as part of continuing their journey, continuing their time. Okay, so a very quick project timeline. Just to show you how far we've come in a short space of time. Autumn 21, we did the first 9 weeks, first time we'd ever tried it, in the garden at Willow House. We did excavation, finds processing. We also tried to do some artistic work with them. We had a few participants who were very keen artists and produced collages and other creative responses, and that was really interesting. We ran a post-excavation and creative arts workshop over the winter, 21-22, at quite a small scale, because we were really still finding our feet. At that point, I stopped being head of field work at the York Archaeological Trust, and I came across to be head of community engagement. And then we brought 2 or 3 people in from various departments in the trust and created a brand new department. So Katrina suddenly had colleagues, which is brilliant. We went from being a team of 1 to being a team of 5, which is excellent. And it really gave us that push to get the whole thing going. And last year we delivered 24 weeks of AOP activity, and by the end we were knackered. But we've had a really, really good time, and we've learned a huge amount doing it. And a lot of that learning obviously is going to be applied this year, and we're going to get going again in April. We ran a much bigger, more ambitious winter program, which I'll give you details about in a moment. And we're gearing up now for 2023. We're going to go back on site first week of April. And we're already starting to plan for 2024. So, you know, from one pilot at the end of 2021, we are at the moment doing extremely well. We have a continuing program that's sustainable, has attracted some good funding, and is hopefully having a positive effect. So, you know, all good so far. So, give you an idea of what people are doing. We've really tried to take all of the practice of field archaeology, as far as is practical, and break it into as many small, manageable tasks as possible. The idea being that they're all perfectly manageable on their own, with a bit of supervision and training, for pretty well anybody just to pick up. So the idea is that it's not overwhelming, it's not confusing, and for people who are perhaps suffering with their self-confidence, it's something relatively straightforward that they can just have a go at, without, you know, having to study or big preamble or whatever. And the idea is that, you know, the primary purpose of the session is to provide them with a nice social environment. The archaeology comes second, which is quite hard for an archaeologist to get their heads around to start with, but you have to, because that's why you're there. So if what they want to do on any given day is turn up, have a cup of tea and speak to someone, that's absolutely fine. Alternatively, and for some of them, if they really get into it and they start wanting to see what else they can do, then they can start to put together those individual tasks into larger ones that actually start to get them into the context of what they're doing. And if they want to, they can put that together to actually developing some serious archaeological skills. But there's no compunctions. That's not the point of it. The point is to turn up and be able to do something. So that's what we try and do. The other aspect, of course, is that, you know, as I'm sure you know, mental health, mental well-being doesn't exist in a vacuum. A lot of our participants also have mobility issues. Some of them have learning difficulties. These are all called intersectional needs. You know, and very often somebody's physical condition can have a negative impact on their well-being and on their mental health. So we've had to really try and make sure the site is physically accessible, and that the jobs we're offering them, or the tasks we're offering, are varied and accessible for people who may well not be confident climbing into a trench, even the relatively shallow ones, such as trench 4 here, So we make sure that there's plenty of finds processing to do with a member of staff who can teach them through and start talking about pottery ID or how bricks are made, or indeed anything the participant wants to talk about. Bits of historical research, group interpretation, and also we're still trying to run these artistic responses as well. Part of this presentation was written by my colleague Alan Johnson. If any of you know Aaron, I'm sure most of you have met him. He places a huge amount of importance on drinking tea, which I agree with very strongly. So you'll spot the bits of this presentation that he's written, because they will all make reference to having a cup of tea, or coffee, or water, or whatever. I must say that's my first experience of having to cater to about 8 different types of milk. You know, without sounding too old-fashioned, I had no idea you could make milk out of so many different things. I've learned a huge amount in the last 12 months. So, very quickly, what do we think this gives them? Well, apart from a basic grounding in archaeological practice, there's some research that doing a series of relatively simple, albeit interesting, repetitive tasks can actually help very much with people who are trying to practice mindfulness and just improve the way they feel about the world. The basic excavation, you know, that is exactly what our professional staff are doing. It's exactly the same. It's taught in exactly the same way. It's just broken up into smaller parts. And genuinely, they're building knowledge and building skills and building confidence, and that has a positive impact. We then also try and engage them in the wider context. And for a lot of the participants, they come from York. Quite a few of them come from Walmgate, and their families lived in Walmgate. Quite a lot of the families lived in a housing that was demolished in the 50s and the 60s to make way for the housing that's currently there. So their families are rooted in that area. And they feel very strongly about having an opportunity to come and actually excavate in that space. It's very important. And then they start to learn about the wider area, get into the history of it, and try new things they might not have had an opportunity to do before. And because Aaron wrote this slide, we must have a cup of tea, which I'm sure most of them have done before, but it's very important, as he keeps reminding them. So I talked about the winter program. Archaeologists do work throughout the winter, but only because they have to. We don't do that. It's too dark, it's too wet, it's horrible. So we bring them inside. So the first strand of the winter program is post-excavation. And we take exactly the same approach to that as we do with the field work. So we say, right, here's a very complex set of archaeological processes. We break it up into a series of really quite straightforward tasks that you can see listed up there. Things like record checking and digitizing and uploading to our database. And then for those who want to get more into it, we can start getting them to understand stratigraphy. We can start getting them to understand a bit of finds analysis. They can start to put together the story of the site themselves. And that's really, really important as well. But again, exactly like the on-site program, they don't have to. The guys who deliver this part of the program are famous for going off on tangents. And it's amazing what you can find on the internet, particularly old photographs and historic maps. They've had some fantastic discoveries in the archives working with the people. Quite a few of whom have fairly rudimentary IT skills. So, you know, we did have one participant who pretty well never used a computer mouse and was so excited they had managed to do it. But they went home, rang their son and said, can you build my computer now? Because I want to have a go with it. This thing that had been sat in a box in their living room for about 6 months. So fantastic. The other element is working with some of my colleagues, particularly in DIG, but also at York, who are essentially specialists in ancient crafting techniques, which is a branch of experimental archaeology. So we've been able to teach some of our participants and also some of our staff, you might recognize that hairy bloke there, how to do things like null binding, which is biking single needle fabric making, trichinopoly, which is decorative wire weaving, and various other skills, pottery making, lantern making. All of these, like everything that we deliver at the Trust, are rooted in archaeological research. So a lot of the stitches that are used in null binding have been analysed from fabric making period excavations, including the famous sock at Walmgate. There is a thing called the York stitch based on that sock. I made a pair of mittens with it. I'm very proud of myself. So yeah, that's been great fun as well. And they've been doing bits of historical research, looking at the historic environment record, aerial photos, maps, census data, trade directories. We found a wonderful butcher, a female butcher, woman who ran her butcher's business in the late 19th century on the site. And we're hoping to go back, when we go back this year, we're hoping to discover a bit more about her, but we're also hoping to put a trench over where her building was and hopefully find the foundations. That would be lovely if it's still there. Oh, there are the tangents there. Yes, I think there were some very fun sessions. And of course, there was drinking tea. And all of this built up to a celebration event that we had in the wonderful Street Life Centre on Coney Street back in February as one of the final events of this year's York Viking Festival. And this was a chance for people to show off what they've made, including this rather peculiar wicker man. And one of them had made a huge dragon head with glowing eyes. It was beautiful. And lots of knitted things. And some of the participants themselves came to this event and were quite happy and confident to talk to the general public about the experience they'd had and what benefits. So, you know, an opportunity to do some public speaking that many of them never really thought about doing before. There you go. There's a list of why we think the winter program is really important. I think the main takeaway is it's further skills development, it's further social bonding, it's further social experiences. The groups coming into these sessions were not necessarily the same people they'd met on the excavation. So it's an opportunity to meet different people and people in a different context. Quite a lot of new friendships come out of this, people who would never have met each other otherwise. Some slightly unlikely friendships as well, but that was wonderful. And we met a fantastic range of people with very, very different lives who brought that experience with. And fundamentally, everything they're doing is real. None of this is pretend archaeology. It's all real. It will form part of the permanent record. It is genuine research, and they've done it. And that's a fundamental principle for us. Yeah, I think we have got the point here. Thanks. I hope that's the last reference to tea. And this is the space at Dig on St. Gate. I don't know if you've all been there before, or may not have been there for a while. It used to be the Ark until 2006. And there we are working in the space there. So that's where that is from. I think I took that photo. It's unusually good for me, right? So where are we? Well, we're at Walmgate. So Walmgate Bar is just out of shot. The bottom here, the white outline is the site. That's Willow House. That's sort of Z-shaped building. And the garden we've been working in is here. And we've also had some trenching in the old car park beyond it. And just to get the idea of the landscape, that's Cemetery Road. There's the Barbican with the new hotel. And there is Long Close Lane heading off to Fishergate Bar, which is roughly where that red dot is. So that tells you where you are. So we're literally underneath the city wall, including where the rampart was nibbled away when they built the care home in 1976. I don't know if they had permission to chop the rampart away, but the scheduled monument boundary still runs through the building. But that's fine. It's all fine. So there we are. And then you can see some housing around there where people live. So the mixture of 19th century terracing and then later mid-20th century developments as well. Okay, so we used the historic maps with the participants to try and give them an idea of what the archive, what the records are like in York, and what the resources are like. So we talk about how map work has developed, what they were made for, the different schematic ways of representing different types of building. And then we obviously look at the specific area itself. So I think most of you recognize John Speed's map of about 1610. I'm sure you've seen it before. And here we have not a lot going on in the Walmgate Hungate area, except of course along Walmgate itself. But you've got St Margaret's there, and you've got St Lawrence's out there beyond the bar, and then you've got this funny pointy thing that's not labelled, which well, we don't know what that's supposed to represent, except it's probably a church, because there is a small church there, which I believe was excavated by the Trust in the mid-70s. I'm looking at Dave Brinklow in the audience, because I think he might have done it.
No, not me.
Not you.
I think it was actually a watching brief conducted by one.
Goodness me, that was Peter. Peter actually did a watching brief himself. Yes. Well, I stand corrected, and of course, it's a superb piece of work, and I hope it's listened to. Sorry, Peter. So this is the area we're interested in just here, where certainly in the early 17th century there wasn't a great deal going on. The other map, obviously there are many of these, most of you will have seen them in the Historic Towns Atlas and various other places. Just an example, we try and show these resources to the participants and help them to learn how to read them. And here we are in this area again, and that, although you can't see on the screen, is a letter P, and when you look at P on this list, you get St. Peter the Willows, first reference to a small church that is now completely gone. It fell into disuse fairly soon after the Reformation and was amalgamated with another parish and eventually demolished. So somewhere on our site, we know that there is the remains of Peter the Willows and its cemetery, because Dr. Adamman found those on a watching brief in the mid-70s. And we have the records of that. So we won't go completely blind into that area, but have a good idea of what it was we might find. It's also conspicuous that a lot of this area here is completely empty, whether that's a result of the Civil War damage or not, I couldn't really say. You know, it's quite useful for them to see how the city was fairly well enclosed within its own boundaries, and there wasn't. So we take them through the map progression, which is a standard archaeological technique. And here we are with the 1890 survey, I think, two different versions of it, colored version and a more detailed one. And our site is in this area. The next slide will show you the outline of the buildings, so don't worry. You can see we've got quite dense medieval housing, medieval plots. You can see those plot boundaries coming off the classic sort of Burgage style, and then this 19th century housing over here. One feature that our participants were quite keen and interested in was the public urinal here just inside the bar, which we did a bit of research on. And it was one of the only sources of clean running water in that neighborhood, to the extent that they actually had to close it because there were queues down the street and people trying to fill pans because there was no running water. And that kind of information, you know, for a period of frankly not long ago, really, certainly for some of our participants, it's within their sort of early family memory, gives you an idea of just how much social change there's been and gives them a kind of very personal and quite tangible connection in place. Actually much more immediate, if you like, than perhaps thinking about the Roman or the Viking archaeology, which we know is in that area as well. So that blue Z shape is the outline of Willow House itself. We've got the nice ordnance survey here with dragons. You know, there's a church here somewhere. There's probably over here, to be honest. We've got in green, this green sort of diamond shape is the garden at the front, where most of the work has been done for archaeology and description. And then here in their car park behind, we also ran our training excavation on the same site. And then we had some people from the social prescribing came across on the bursary to do the training. Having them on the same site but separate from each other meant we could manage the experience as well, but they always had the opportunity to come and see what was going on. So they got a richer experience. So this list here is some of the things we were hoping to find. So we've got remains of housing on Willow Street, Short Willow Street, which is a little side street coming here, yards, a possible privy. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Archaeologists love toilets, they're great. It wasn't one, or if it was, it gone. And then on the other side, we had backyards and pits and boundaries. It was quite clear very quickly that we didn't have much of the 19th century landscape left, because when they built the care home, it seems to have been bulldozed flat, which is actually quite unusual. Very often in York, you'll find that the 19th century foundations are still there, and we were hoping they would be. They weren't, which is a shame. What we did have, however, was a large amount of residual artifacts from all periods of York. So although no one on this side of the excavation dug any soil earlier than about 1973, we still got the full range of pottery from the whole of York story, because that's what happens when you dig a hole in York. So here's a nicer picture. There's the garden. It was mentioned earlier that it's quite open, it's quite friendly, it's accessible, but it is also enclosed. It has a safe feeling. You know, it's not just wide open. You can't just walk in. You do have to go through a gate. So there's a safety there. There's a bit of a security there, but you're not hidden. You know, it's not private. It's open and it's welcoming, and that's why we really want. That's why we're very pleased to work there. And here's some of my team, and a nice bunch of people who can hope to dig holes. So we ran a pilot, autumn 2021. It went very well. We learned a lot. The first time we tried to deliver any of this stuff in a social prescribing context. And very quickly we realized just how much residual material we had. We had a lot to play with, and that gave us a lot of confidence. bit disappointed that there weren't walls and floors, but nevertheless, lots to go at. And it was coming to the end of this one when we suddenly realized we need something for these people to keep going. We didn't know if this was going to work or not, and it worked so well, we thought we need to have something in place. So we very quickly designed the first winter program and got it running within about 3 weeks at the end of this one, which is a Herculean effort, but it meant we could keep that experience going. We didn't let people just get to the end and then drop off again into nothing. And that was a really important revelation we had while we were there. So our first winter program is a fairly low-key affair, but we learned a lot doing it. And we were able to work with York St. John to get people to do all sorts of interesting creative activities. So we had some people creative writing, somebody made a stop motion animation. We did a soundscape, which I don't think I've ever heard that. It's basically an audio recording of ambient sound to give you an impression of the place. At one point, I think you can hear somebody pretending to be a cow. I don't know why, but yeah, that's right. So that was great fun, and that set us up nicely for the big season. And I said we didn't find any structures. It had all been bulldozed flat, but nevertheless, it was the process that mattered, not what we found. So the first trench was a bit of a test kit. My staff, once it got deeper, were the ones who were digging in it, but to start with, it was definitely participants. And we might just touch the top of the Victoria of the one of the cinder yard surfaces there, and we'll hopefully go back and cover it later on. And then one of the larger trenches, you can see the variety of activities we've got going in here. So we try to let them have a go at pretty well everything. So you've got people obviously troweling, we've got a bit of very gentle hoeing, a bit of gentle mattocking going on. We also got them doing the survey, bits of basic survey, you know. Quite a lot of them found that quite challenging. They didn't have the confidence to do it. But as anyone who's done it before will tell you, using a dumpy level is actually, you know, it's quite straightforward if you take people through the process gently and calmly. And even I can do it, you know, and my GCSE was a very long time ago and I didn't do very well in it. So, you know, it's an activity that can look a bit daunting, but actually breaks up into manageable chunks and is perfectly, you know, pretty well anyone can do it. And we try to encourage them to have a go. And here we found possible yard surfaces. They got very excited about the concrete lined drain, which is great because it was a feature. So that's nice. Yeah. We also rather unexpectedly got a medieval gold coin out of here, which I've never seen in my life, was flipped up by one of our NHS participants who lifted it up and went, "What's this?" We went, "Oh." So, you know, just making the point, you can find well anything. You know, that's been turned over in the soil for, you know, 300, 600 years. And the person who found it had been referred by the doctor to our project and had a wonderful day. And that's fun. That's brilliant. You know, that was great fun. It was a lovely day on site. I was really excited. I said we were looking for a privy. We didn't find it, but we had great fun digging a hole. This trench produced our only piece of Viking pottery, which is lovely. So that was quite exciting. And again, you can see participants there doing the measured drawing from the grid and, you know, reporting the deposits and then getting back in and digging them. So, you know, having a go at every part of the process. Similarly here in trench 4, we didn't find the building we were hoping, but we did find a huge spread of rubble, which we're going back to this year. We're hoping it had a cellar, and we're hoping that when it was locked down, the rubble was all tipped into the cellar. Fingers crossed, because you can get nice things in there, but who knows? But there you can see, you've got this trench in particular was great for people who weren't so confident with their mobility, because it was very shallow and had a nice step at one end. And a surprising number of people who, when they came to it, first of all said, "Oh no, I can't do that," gradually got the confidence up and under their own volition said, "You know, I really want to do that now," and had a go and had a fantastic time. So very, very successful and a lot of fun. And there we are, they were doing the photography as well. So we really did try and break up every single part of the process to make it accessible. On the other side, in our training excavation, we found quite a lot of typical medieval backyard activity, including some quite spectacularly deep pits, which were great fun. Lots of fish bone, medieval pottery, a lot of sort of cow and cattle and sheep, and quite a lot of Walmgate ware. So those sort of, you know, medieval flagons, sort of made the local clay in Walmgate, funnily enough. And so really nice to find locally produced wares as well, and great fun. And then of course we then had our social prescribing people come across as well. Those of them who were more confident and wanted to take it further were able to take up a bursary we could offer by our funding and get a little bit more skills training, and that was very successful. So we're quite proud of that. Okay, we did evaluate. That's an awful lot of text, but the most important things out of there were that people did say, yeah, you know what, this is actually having a positive effect on them. There's a lot of emphasis on how welcome they were made to feel, which we were very grateful for. You know, we made sure we chose staff who weren't just experienced, they were also engaging, they were also patient. Quite a lot of them had their own lived experience, you know, and that was really important. That level of empathy was very, very useful. The variety of activities, the fact that it wasn't all about digging holes, and that they were made to feel part of a team and made to feel that they were part of discovery. And that's exactly why archaeology works, we think, in this context, because it's sociable and it's fun and it's a bit different. And, you know, that's lovely to hear. So we had to adapt our practice a lot to make it accessible for people. So we made sure that we had separate quiet areas. We had a whole cabin dedicated purely as a quiet space. So particularly some of our, we had some autistic participants who would occasionally need to go and, you know, look after themselves for a bit in peace, and we made sure there was a space for them to do that. The trenches were all modelled very carefully to make sure they were as safe as possible to get in and out of. We made sure that we didn't just dig giant holes everywhere, that we had interesting archaeology was left for people who were less confident to get into a deeper trench so they could still access it. Lots of seating, lots of kneeling aids, and that's just for the staff. And then assistance and flexibility of working positions. You know, if it worked for them and it was safe, they could do it. That was fine. I mentioned the ratio earlier, and the fact that we limited the numbers on every session just to keep it calm and friendly. And we got them to participate in a bit of data gathering. So they would fill in what are called well-being umbrellas. These are the charts with different emotional states and a 1 to 5 thing on them, just to get a little bit of quantitative number data. And then we also took part in focus groups. Now, the next 5 or 6 slides are just a series of nice pictures, but they also include quotations directly from our participants, because we found the most valuable information they gave us was their own testimony. It's obviously been anonymized and they've consented to its use, just in case you're wondering. But that does highlight that we had to be very careful with the safeguarding here because we're dealing with vulnerable people. So there we are. I won't linger on too long, unless if you want me to read them out, I can do. Just shout. But you know, comments about you know, not just sit there and be lectured at, but be given the tool and told to get on with it. You know, given them opportunity to get in early and just have a go. I think a lot of people really appreciated that. A lot of people saying, you know, well, I'm too old for that nonsense. You know, we had a very wide variety of people of different ages all working together. So it was quite a nice little sort of intergenerational work as well. People who would never normally meet each other. Quite like that one. I'm going to leave you a few moments as to read that because that made me really quite emotional. Oh, for goodness sake. So it's the last line that really got me. I remembered who I was. I mean, someone turns around to you and says that to you in the French. That's extremely humbling. And, you know, it just reminds you that we were working with vulnerable people. And in case you were wondering, our staff all had additional training. We were all mental health first aid trained. We put in place external supervision so we can have a forum to discuss what we need to do. We have reflective practice. And we went to a lot of safeguarding work with a lot of professional boundary training, because none of our staff is a clinician. None of them is a mental health caseworker. We're archaeologists. This is an archaeological project. So every participant, we had details of who their contacts were. We knew who they'd been referred through. We discussed each one's needs individually before they joined with their support worker. So we made sure that those mechanisms were in place to make sure that they were safe. And then to get comments like that is just lovely. We also had a lot of local cats who made a lot of friends as well. There we go, and there's the payoff from that. You know, I suddenly remembered who I am. You know, fantastic. We couldn't have better testimony than that, really actually doing that in terms of. We are washing, we were nice to them, we let them wash in warm water. But like, well, I were a lad, you know. Yeah, there we are, one of our friendly cats helping with the archaeological run. I think this is quite important as well. So we made sure that there were indoors activities as well, particularly if the weather wasn't too good. You'll all remember a point last summer where it was, I think at one point, we were the hottest place on the planet, allegedly. So 42 degrees in York is not something I ever want to experience again. And we closed the site, it was unworkable, you know, just too hot. But a lot of times we made sure there were indoors activities. So here, we're obviously fine sorting, we're doing bits of pottery identification. We brought along our enormous reference collection, and we did a pottery session with them every week. And actually quite a few of them, by the end of it, were going, oh, is that gritty ware? And we go, yes, my work here is done. And somebody went, no, I don't think that is, I think that's splash glaze. And like, oh, okay, fine. These are people who 5, 6, 8 weeks earlier had never held a trowel and never thought they could do any archaeology at all. So wonderful. Oh, two of my favourite finds. So this one here, Terry's chocolate orange wrapper. Turns it over, there was a competition on the back, but there was a competition on the back that expired in 1989. There we are, dating. Yeah. The thing, the rusty tin there, does anyone in the audience or online remember buying top deck shandy? Yeah, few of you. Okay. Did a bit of research, not been available in the UK since about 1983. We had a look on YouTube, some of the old TV adverts were hilarious. You get a skinny guy on the beach, not getting any attention, drinks his tin of shandy, suddenly he's the centre of attention. Classic 1970s advertising, brilliant. The person who found it remembered buying it. He went, oh, I know what this is. I used to drink this. It's like, fantastic. Yeah. That was every bit as fun and interesting and engaging as the Samian ware, as the flower pot, which had somebody on who quite obviously wasn't wearing any clothes, and the gold coin. You know, we weren't trying to make a big thing of any particular find. It was just discovery, it's people, it's culture, it's fun. And then a nice shot there of Aaron with his hard hat on at the bottom of the deeper trench. We've got somebody sitting there, sifting, people working on finds. Nice sunny day, right inside the walls, you know, just lovely, gentle fun, and the occasional magic find as well. There you go. I could have written that when I started out as a digger 20 years ago. That's what kept me up, and that's what got me back to site in the morning when I was cold and it was wet, thinking, I might find something. So for us staff, as well as meeting some amazing people, some amazing stories, you know, it's just a lovely reminder of your own passion for this thing, you know, the reasons why you did it in the first place. Yeah, it's actually, it's very enriching for us as well. So yeah, we all loved it. Somebody finds something, doesn't matter what it is, everyone else is really pleased for them. So we've got a variety of different pottery bits there. And then that last one there, just a place where you can be in. And we've got our Nelly on the end there with so why it keeps doing that, it's a motion sense. No, it's just being in flux. There we are, just gives you a taste not only of what they were doing on site, but also some of the things they were saying to us. We had one participant's support worker rang us and said, before this person came on your project, she wouldn't leave her flat. Now she goes on her own on the bus 3 times a week. And we thought, okay. We haven't done anything magic. We've just opened up a hole and let her have a play in it. But that's fine. You know, it's a small thing, but it makes a big difference for a few people. And, you know, you don't have to tell us that. The fact they chose to share that with us was lovely. We were very thankful. So, what's coming? So I talked about our winter program earlier. A couple more images from this year. This is everybody learning how to do Viking knitting. We did have a Christmas jumper competition. My colleague Joanne won with the Batman one. I've got one in store. I'll one up there and see if you watch this space. That was all great. I mentioned that they were able to take part as part of the biking festival as well, which we were really happy with. And just last week, we had a bit of a graduation for the cohort who were coming to the end of their time. It was lovely. It was quite moving and gave them a memento. And off they go. I mentioned that some are working at Edinburgh. Others are, swapping numbers and talking about starting, their own historical social groups. That's great stuff. That's fun. So we're gearing up. 3 weeks' time, we'll be back up there. We'll be rolling back underway with the spring, summer and autumn programs with new participants. We've already had quite a lot of interest. Increasing number of GP surgeries have been ringing us to ask about what this program is and get people enrolled on it. So it's getting some momentum. The word is out there. People are interested. This may be our last year at Willow House, so we'll be looking for somewhere else. We've got a couple of options because we want to move this on. We want to carry on doing it. So watch this space. And we're starting to be asked about delivering this project in other places. And we're very, very gently looking at that. Last thing we want to do is undermine this project. This project has to be maintained. It has to be sustainable. Anything we do elsewhere has to be separately funded, separately resourced. But we've had interest from, amongst other places, local NHS. So there were clinical settings who were interested in working with us to see how this might work in their setting. And that's amazing. That'd be really, really interesting to see whether we can do. So I've got some details in the referral process. The majority of people are coming through either link workers through social prescribing, or they're coming through groups who they already work with. And there are some contact details on there, but I can pass on contacts to the committee and they can get them out to other people if they want them. And what are we going to be digging next year? So we've got a new trench here. I mentioned earlier that when Willow House was built, they took a bite out of the embankment. Well, Keith Emerick and Co. at Historic England have just confirmed our Schedule 1 in consent, which is great. And we're going to do a little hole in the area they took out. So we're going to be investigating under the embankment, which is actually quite a rare opportunity. So again, a real, quite a small trench, but nevertheless, a research opportunity. And it's being done by people who are social prescribed. We're going to carry on in all the other trenches, and we're currently negotiating with the council to try and open a trench here in the sort of public amenity space between Willow House and Walmgate. And this is where our butcher, that I mentioned earlier, this is where her shop was. And we're hopeful as we get closer to Middlegate and away from the Willow House itself, that we will get more of the 19th century materials surviving. So hopefully we will have walls and floors and footings. And that's more what we want to deliver this year. So lots of interesting questions to ask, still to answer still, and lots of fun to be had. So that's it from me. So thank you very much. And I'm very happy to take questions if you want. Fantastic. Yes. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Any idea where the next site will be?
No. If I'm being honest, no, I don't. No. But yeah, we've got, we're long conversations with Claire McRae at CYC, city archaeologist, and obviously, York's a fairly small place, as we all know. Everyone knows everyone else. So, talking to the Conservation Trust and various other people, we'll find some. Obviously, as everyone will know, we're also a commercial unit. So there may well be opportunities through some of our clients, perhaps developing in the city as well. We'll see.
Any questions? Any online, Graham?
There's a comment from Sue Major to say thanks very much again. This is so impressive and inspiring. I expect you're glad not to found human bones.
Yes, she's right. Yeah. A note on that: if we had identified human bone, we would have left it and reburied it. We wouldn't have disturbed it. But obviously, as I said earlier, we do have the records that were made by Dr. Adamant in the 70s, and we knew we weren't going to be in that area. That was a deliberate choice. But you never know; we might find them yet. Who knows? Yeah.
Community engagement is that broader thing that interests me. Because I've noticed other other organisations in the arts museum world seem to have a strong community engagement requirement. Is that an external thing, didn't you, or is it something that's internal to the trust?
It's a very good question. I think in the wider heritage world, it's definitely the in thing, because there's funding available for it. Speaking for the trust, as you probably know, we're an educational charity. We have been for 50 years. And so, you know, outreach, engagement, teaching, learning has been part of our raison d'etre from the very beginning. So you've given me an opportunity to put a massive plug in here for what we do. Thank you very much. I'll get a pat on the head tomorrow at work. Our strategy, which was recently revived after its previous 5-year period, has got this idea of social benefit and public benefit absolutely at its core. It's a central plank of what the trust wants to achieve over the next 5 years. And it's always been looking for opportunities to do this type of thing. Social prescribing isn't new, it's been around for quite a long time, but it's sort of started in things like conservation works, nature trails, litter picking, that kind of thing. So conservation trust volunteers, that sort of thing. It has a presence in heritage. So there are quite a lot of museums, particularly Wessex Archaeology with their Well City Salisbury, which is a fantastic project. Museum of London. In Doncaster, there's a brilliant project in Doncaster, which is social prescribing. It's all about the heritage and history of Doncaster, similarly in Leeds. So there were lots of other people doing similar things. Most people know John Kenny as well, who's a community archaeologist. He's done a little bit of social prescribing as well. So, you know, we're the only ones who've really tried to do it explicitly with field archaeology baked in at the start. It seems to be working quite well. And to answer your question, it's meeting our strategic aims. You know, we aim to leave the place slightly better than we found it.
Any more?
There's a non-internet. Margaret's saying, are you able to tell us more?
Yeah, well, it was gold and medieval. It was a Corsa Noble from the reign of Edward VI. So 1360 something. I grew up in Scotland. My English medieval history is not great.
1327 to 1377.
Thank you. There you go. I do believe it was from the period where he claimed half of France, but that doesn't narrow it down particularly. Very nice. Currently, you know, being looked after in our conservation laboratory. Yeah.
So I just staggering, isn't it, to be referred to whatever circumstances and to go what might be your first dig and you find a gold coin.
I know. Which is about what we called it. No.
Yeah.
I find it's one of the things that for me as a young digger, you know, I found any number of washers. You know, I remember finding a thing with a hole in it. I've got the pierced coin. I went, no, lad, it's a washer. And I remember I found my first long cross penny. Yeah. And I did a little victory dance. Luckily, I was in the middle of nowhere and it was foggy and nobody saw me do it. But no, what a wonderful thing. But also, you know, some of the other things we found I didn't mention, you know, people, you know, medieval tile with dog prints, paw prints, with thumbprints and pottery. This, you know, everyday traces of the person who made it. And these had a really profound effect on the people who were finding it. Really
so I noticed that you said that other cities like Salisbury, of course, places like that, have done a similar program. Is there any indication that other cities will use your template in their city?
Probably. Yeah. Because something I didn't mention is last year we won the Community Project of the Year award at the National Museum and Heritage Awards. I did cheaply put the logo on the screen there, you might have noticed it. So that you know, that was a recognition of what the project does. And yeah, we've had a lot of interest from other people. One of the things I've really appreciated about the social benefit sector in heritage is it's very collegiate. You know, we've had a huge amount of support, particularly from colleagues at Wessex and also at Mola and University of Leicester and various other places. There's a lot of it's a very collaborative, shared environment. The National Academy for Social Prescribing is a fantastic institution. It doesn't just cover us; it covers social prescribing across the whole spectrum. Yeah. There's a lot of shared knowledge, lots of online seminars, lots of best practice. So, you know, we've been really, really grateful and been beneficiaries of that. And it's, you know, it's kind of behoves us to pass that on as well. So, you know, it's a collaborative effort across the sector. But obviously we're the best.
Well, of course, you're the prototype. Any more questions? Yeah, Nick.
Observation, really.
Yeah.
Something I really like was the fact you found the chocolate bar to date something which is relatively recent.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lesson. It's like now.
Yes.
And a lot of people can learn things that they didn't know from 20 years ago. And if you're doing site investigation, something like that is significant. Shows that we did that.
Yes.
Yeah, not the first archaeologist to have done anything on beer cans, because there's a famous archaeologist wrote a theoretical text in the mid-80s, and one chapter was dedicated entirely to beer labels, because of course it was. Yeah, thank you. And what I particularly liked about that was the person who found it used to drink it. So what are the odds? You know, we found they found something, found a bit of fabric with a print on it. They thought it was a bit of a paper bag, and I looked at it. And I thought, I'm sure that says number 10 on it, and it looks red, and it rang a bell, and so I googled it. And I think it was an advert for a magazine for Embassy number 10, or Players number 10, sorry. And I think it must have had coupons, and that's why it was clipped out. And I think it's 1969. There you go.
Yeah, that's just from the spoil from perhaps constructing Willow House.
Exactly. But somebody cut that out for a reason.
Yeah.
Taking you back slightly further, it's fantastic you've been allowed to dig under the ground.
Yes.
Yeah.
When was the last time that ground was disturbed?
Probably 1976 when they built the care home. Yeah.
But would they have gone down?
They may well have done, and that's one of the things. And so that is a possibility. There was a drain quite close by, so that will have cut down into the soil. But there should be enough left there undisturbed. We're hoping to just, you know, there might not be anything there, but it's an opportunity to look. You know, there's been a lot of work on the York City walls. I'm looking at Mr. Brinklow here. I've done a lot of it. I've done a lot of it. You know, most recently they're reconstructing things like Tower 2 at Mission Hill. You know, it's an ongoing effort to keep those things standing. But it's unusual. You get a chance to cut into the ramparts for obvious reasons, and the hole's already been made, so we're not really doing any harm. But I'd say also, Historic England have been very, very supportive as well, which is you know, we're grateful. So
It's in their interest to be.
I couldn't possibly say that. But yeah, no, I mean, it's just it's lovely.
Yeah.
It's great to take people, you know, the archaeology from a purely archaeological perspective might not be the most exciting earth-shattering in the world, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
It's the opportunity for people to do it, and as has been pointed out, it's still interesting and it's still new. So what more?
It's fantastic. Any more questions? I think we've run the mill.
I could just make one more observation. My kids went to Park Road School and that we had a tree planting in about 1991, and the age was incredibly hard because it's only a foot down. You hit the foundations, a whole lot of terrace houses with demolished there. But actually, you know, it was quite interesting how people didn't know that. I didn't know it. I looked it up, and it was also, you know, all the people doing it suddenly realised that they were putting out Victorian floor tile.
Yes.
You know, they weren't actually any sensitive to the environment, all in trying to plant trees. But you know, it was just that engagement in the history of the area. People didn't know.
Well, I mean,
Spontaneously.
it's funny you should mention that, because we've been working with the Groves Association, and I know quite a few people in the Groves who are very active and very, you know, interested in their heritage and exploring it, which is great. And yeah, they said, so I think it must have been somebody you probably know, said exactly that. They were planting trees, and the Victoriana was a foot down, and it's all there. And you look at the maps, and there are 3 streets, you know, and dozens of houses, not hundreds of houses. It's all there. It's brilliant. So funny enough, we have been speaking to the school.
And I could stab that through a snowball through the window of one of those houses when they were derelict.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll find the snowball, but we might find it.
Yeah.
But it is to be hoped that perhaps you do find the odd basement.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, as I recall, there's a wonderful photo in the Yorkshire Evening Press Archive about 1969, taken from roughly the position of Boesmorel House, showing that site as a sort of
I think I've seen it,
yeah.
yes.
But there's always, because of course, my childhood was concerned with the building of the Benedict's Road estate, and we moved to Bishopthorpe Road just after it had been demolished. And of course, there were bits of houses you could trace on the ground, even as a 6-year-old, and you could see that, you're freshly demolition, and it might be good to find some of those.
Well, what's also good is that you can then go back to the census records, you can go back to the trade directories, and you can start to reflect who lived in these houses. And that's, you can't do that really for medieval archaeology, for Roman archaeology, unless you're very lucky. But this is just a little bit different. There's a huge amount of social history there.
Special pleading from my field, the newspaper archive as well can be useful.
Oh, yes,
For all
absolutely.
sorts of little incidents.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm surprised you haven't found more animal bones.
We've had quite a lot.
All right, yeah. For those not from York, of course, before the cattle market was built in 1827, Walmgate was the cattle market.
Yep.
The whole length of it, effectively. So I'm amazed you haven't found. So,
We've got bags and bags and bags. Yeah.
Very well, that's,
We've got a lot of bones.
yeah. Right. Any more questions? Well, thanks for those on Zoom. I think once again we had a good crowd either. Maybe not in the room, but I'm not surprised, although it isn't snowing now. Do bear in mind I've put out leaflets for the next talk in April, which is Dr. Jonathan French again, the second part of Geoffrey Kerr's great unpublished thesis on York's preservation tradition into the 20th century. I remember the 19th century. I shall never look at William Etty the same way again. So I look forward to that. So just, as I say, have a safe journey home, and good night, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.